Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, you look phenomenal today. Thanks for joining. See what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. On this episode, we talked to Tyson Avery. He is the Chief Compliance Officer at a company called Lucid. He's worked at CBRE. He's worked at Starbucks, done a lot of great work. And he was also a JAG officer during the Iraq War in Abu Ghraib. So we talk about that, and he has a lot of really cool lessons from that experience that translate directly into your organization. So I hope you enjoy. Let's learn.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
My man, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. You have the coolest background of all time.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a little upgrade since our last episode, man. How's it going?
That's very strong, very strong. It's good. It's good. It's good. And I even like the hoodie, man.
I'm casual. My casual Ethico hoodie. You know what I mean? I gained. I had an accident a couple of months ago, and I was I broke my neck in September. Ooh. And so 99.9% chance of being paralyzed. Thank God I'm good to go. And so I was doing this thing called 75 hard. Have you heard of that before? Mm-hmm. It's like a fitness challenge, It's like 75 days. You work out twice a day, you drink a bunch of water. I don't know, it's a bunch of stuff like that. And so I was getting in really good shape. I was almost halfway through 75 hard when I got in my wreck. And then I was in bed for 2 months.
Wow. So you just declined.
Oh, dude, I'm so weak. You can see I'm in my my sweatshirt phase because I put on a couple of LBs and it wasn't even holiday related. Okay, so that's I like to come across like I'm casual. I'm really just hiding. I'm hiding in a sweatshirt right now.
Well, there is a tremendous amount of humility in what you just said, but I tell you what, I'm 51. But I think that we talked about this before. I served in the Marine Corps for a long time, so I still wake up every morning at 4:50. I work out. My goal is to run 1,300 miles every year, and this year I got 1,310 miles the year, and I do weights and all that good stuff. But you know what? The way that I think about it though is I'm just going to go as long as the good Lord tells me. Eventually it's going to be a knee or an ankle or heaven forbid not a spine or anything. But you do what you can, and if you've got the ability, go for it. So I have to ask, what happened? Did you fall funny? Automobile accident?
Yeah, I was in a car accident. I was driving to Atlanta, and I got sideswiped. Someone drove off, and I woke up in the totaled car. And I was about to give a keynote speech the next day because I was I was coming down early because I didn't want there to be any issues, and I didn't think anything was wrong. My neck definitely hurt, but I just thought it was just car accident pain, and I was like, I got to do this speech tomorrow. I don't even think I need to go to the hospital. And so they ended up talking me into going to the hospital.
Could you move fingers and toes and everything?
Yeah, I could move. I didn't want to go to the hospital because I thought I was fine. I had to do the speech, and I just thought it was going to be such a cash grab, of scamming me into an ambulance, and then they wheel me into the emergency room, and I was just counting the dollars, the dollars were going out. I was like, this is a freaking cash grab. I'm fine. And then the guy was like, your neck's broken, and I was like, all right, good thing I listened. Crazy.
Yeah, because you could have made just a natural movement, and it could have been enough to sever.
Crazy.
Wow.
I mean, just to get that close, and I saw the MRI of how close it was. I mean, just thank God, man. I mean, it was really, really a wild.
Thank God, indeed. I hope. You were already doing amazing self-improvement things, but I hope you look at this and say, okay, this is my chance. Now
that's exactly how I'm looking at it. Yeah, I got a little project now. I got a little project for 2025. Get back in shape. You know what I'm saying? Get healthy again. But it's crazy. I mean, I took the neck brace off a couple of weeks ago, and it's still so tight. It's really
stiff.
Tight.
Yeah.
It's crazy how the body responds. It's your circumstances change, or it's my body was like, oh, I guess we don't need these muscles anymore. And they just everything just shrank,
Hey, guess what? When you get older, that atrophy goes faster. Your body's like, oh, 2 days? Oh, you don't need that anymore.
Exactly. What the heck happened? So maybe I got to get on that 4:50 a.m. Marines move. I think that's a pretty good. So 1,300 miles a year. What is that? Is that 40 a week?
No, it's a really easy calculation. It's 5 miles a day, 5 days a week times 52 weeks out of the year is 1,300. And that's where that number, so that number sounds totally random, but it's actually deliberate. And so I just, we all get motivated by different things. I get motivated by lists, as weird as that sounds. And so if I fall behind, I know I fall behind really quickly because of the calculation. Like I know where I am. I'm either ahead of the game or below the game. And it's any way you can motivate yourself. And I really believe this is that it doesn't matter what you like to do. So, if you like to walk or I get bored to tears swimming, but I love running. So, but if you're a swimmer or, hopscotch, whatever it matters, but if you're doing something every day and if you just incorporate it in what you do, I don't think about getting up at 4:50 every morning. It's just who I am. And I work out before everybody else kind of starts their day, and it's just that continuous activity that discipline leads to good benefits in life. And you know what, Lord willing, I'll still be able to play cribbage and Yahtzee at 85 and 90, and that's what I'm hoping for.
I a couple of years ago, I trained for or I guess it was like maybe a little over a year ago, I was training for a half Ironman. And I had never done any
Sweet.
I had never done any endurance sports before, and I never really got it. And my buddy was like, "Hey, do you want to do this together?" And I was like, "I don't want to do this together because I don't like running, biking, or swimming." But I was like, my only reason to say no was just because it was just scary. But in that process of going through that and training for all those months, I kind of started to understand what you're talking about. There was this analogy somebody gave where it's like, if every day you just put a jelly bean in the jar, then at some point you'll be like, wow, this jar's pretty full. And that's kind of the thing with, this lifelong fitness journey you're talking about, or this,
finances, anything, fitness, anything. It's true. By the way, I got a great, are you a fan of Audible at all?
Yeah. Love it.
Okay. So, and I think I can send it to, I don't know if I've sent it to anybody yet, but I listened to this book that was great. Hang on a second. It was called Outlive. I listened to two. The first one was called Outlive by a guy by the name of Peter Attia, who apparently is a big deal. Okay. And he's great because he breaks down a lot of scientific stuff, easy to digest stuff. But he basically says, yeah, we all talk about lifespan, but it's all about health span. And there's 4 things. It's and I can't remember the order. It's exercise, eating, sleeping, and then the 4th one is medicine. But he said that's like 3 and 1/8. It's a tiny one. It's really those big 3 things that keep
exercise,
you going.
Sleep, and diet.
Diet, yeah, exactly what your grandmother would have told you, when you were 7. And so he goes through all of the science behind it. And then I'm actually listening. I just finished another book called Forever Strong. Cool. By a woman by the name of Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. And it's interesting because he put exercise, whether it's aerobic and anaerobic, at the same level. What she does, and I mean, you can tell by my body frame, I'm an aerobic guy. I'm not an anaerobic. I played cornerback in high school. I didn't play the lineman. So she actually emphasizes that muscle, when you become middle-aged, let's say when you hit 40 and on, muscle retention is so key. So she goes through this whole scientific breakdown of why muscle retention is so critical to the functionality mentally and physically of everything else. So those are my 2 health books. Of it.
It's not just the strength of it, which is kind of the primary use of this system. There's also kind of other exogenous impacts that it has, right?
Yes, it's got all sorts of ancillary impacts. So not moving those muscles make huge difference mentally, physically, for everything. So yeah, and like I said, it doesn't matter what you do. As long as you do something and you get out there and you love what you do, then you're going to live a much healthier, happier life. I
saw this TikTok and this guy said, it was like a fitness guy or something. And he said, after 30, 90% of people will never sprint again. That's a crazy thing. Think about that.
Yep.
And just and then with my experience with that accident, that lack of mobility, I mean, my neck was in that thing for 90 days. And I mean, it's almost a month later now. And it's still so tight. That mobility is so critical. I'm really kind of realizing that now. And then I see my daughter doing, bending like a pretzel. I'm just like, enjoy that, or do that every day. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's the answer.
Yeah. You encourage it and are selfish at this and jealous at the same time.
Exactly. So you got a promotion since the last time we talked. So congrats on that. So how has that been, right? You were at these sort of like longer standing companies, and now you're at this fast moving, I don't want to call it a startup, but it has a lot of those kind of vibes. How has that process of like doing this work that you're, well known for, how has that felt different in this different kind of environment?
So it's interesting. And I'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about Abu Ghraib, is that so much of what we do in this space is, yes, you've got your 7 elements of an effective program under US DOJ guidelines, but so much of this has to do with culture.
Right.
And so in my time as Chief Ethics Compliance Officer of CBRE, we went from a $6 billion company to a $24 billion company, and we went from a US company with a global footprint to truly a global entity. And so that was an opportunity not only to build the programmatics to mitigate risk, but incorporate it as part of your code and part of your values so that it was really integrated into who you were. Now, right. Starbucks had been around for a long time and had a much stronger established program. So it was more about refining it and making it better. But what's neat about Lucid is that it is in that early phases. We are still kind of toddlers in a lot of ways, and not our vehicles. The vehicles are unbelievable, but how the organization comes together, how it culturally works, how leaders orient themselves and focus on things, all that can be driven by the leaders themselves and how the culture engages. And so there's a really a twofold. It's building the programmatics to mitigate risk so that the business can be as successful as possible, but also orienting the culture again. So it's that human element that can be successful, because that's really what we all want. So right. So taking those different experiences and taking it in a newer entity that really we still internally call ourselves a startup. And we do that in terms of, hey, this is our progression. This is where we're going. We kind of use it as a quick kind of nomenclature to say, there's shorthand. There's so much that we can do in this space to really be the best entity we can be. And so having that somewhat of a newness orientation makes it open for a lot of change and just a lot of positive elements across the board.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're in this curing process. When you like lay cement down, it takes a little time to like set. And I think that happens in a company as well, right? Like there's sort of this curing period where things can move still, but then once it sort of settles, I think it becomes like increasingly hard to like change the DNA of the company, right? Like maybe at one of these other companies that you worked at that were more older or more mature, you probably stepped into something that wasn't really moving tremendously or like at a really high velocity, where it sounds like now, given that you're in this sort of startup phase, there's a lot more there's a lot more you can move, right? Like there's a lot more you can establish in that culture. So if that's true, like what have you been surprised by in this like sort of more fluid like mode that you're in versus the more sort of cured organizations that you stepped into prior?
So I think one of the things, and this is from a compliance perspective, is that when an organization such as Lucid is where it's at, it's ramping up really fast. It's doing a lot of amazing things, and our engineering is incredible. The vehicles are incredible, and we're trying to backfill everything else, in a way that is as good as our vehicles. And so it's just a lot of really good people doing a lot of really good things. So bringing it all together, take governance, for example, ensuring that we all have access to our governance, that it's all consistent, that that there is some organization to it. So it's just a lot of really talented, amazing people cycling as quickly as possible. And to bring that together in a holistic way is still part of the challenge, and I think that's true with any new entity, and again, that's what makes it exciting, and that's what makes the future of Lucid so amazing, because again, we have such tremendous vehicles, and they are really truly the future of our mobility. And we have a real opportunity to be part of a very important change in culture.
So if you listen to the CEO of CBRE, pick one, talk, and you listen to the current CEO or the prior CEO of Starbucks talk, and you listen to the Lucid CEO talk, those guys sound very different, right? Like
Yes.
one is,
Yes.
the Lucid guy, he seems to be he seems to be kind of an engineer. Is that accurate?
Yes, he is.
So,
Yeah, he's absolutely an engineer.
So what I'm trying to get to is, these different sort of org types, they have this different DNA, they have this different lens that they see the world through. And that lens is really kind of an accumulation of all the lenses of the people. And I think if you have a disproportionate, preponderance of you have like a ton of engineers, well, then that's going to be more of an engineering lens versus maybe a hospitality. I know CBRE isn't hospitality, but
Right.
Starbucks
Person
kind
to
of
person.
is, right? Person to person, kind of B2C type of thing. Well, I guess you're B2C also. But I'm looking for some, insight or some perspective on what it feels like in these different kind of like market segments to do what you're trying to do. Is there a different energy from like other stakeholders, board, leadership, or whatever, with respect to like how it all fits together to a greater degree in the engineering kind of organization you're in versus another organization that might prioritize something different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Wow, here's my really true answer is it depends.
Okay.
because you've got the industry, you've got the circumstances, you've got the newness of the entity, and then you've got the leaders and the personalities. So it's really a matter of being able to see all of that, understanding then where the business is going, and understand how you can do your part to empower that business success through ethics and risk mitigation. And that is really key. And all four of those factors play into that. And so, our CEO at Lucid, he is incredibly focused on vehicle safety. And it's great because that translates naturally down the organization. And, let's be honest, as we talked about, vehicles can be deadly. And if you had a CEO that didn't pay attention in that space, that can have really kind of tremendous flow downs to the rest of the organization. So that tone at the top in those really critical elements is so important.
Yeah, and I find like the best, maybe you can react to this, but I find like the best compliance officers are the ones that are best at like integrating into the business. And I think they integrate into the business, they can basically kind of like hide the dog's medicine in like a piece of cheese. You know what I'm saying? By like kind of hijacking, wrong word, but hijacking a value that maybe governs that type of business, right? Like in a manufacturing,
That's right.
They can latch onto safety, manufacturing safety. In yours, maybe you're latching onto vehicle safety because so many of the tenets of these sort of like broader axioms or these organizational values that are critical to that, a business in that industry do overlap so much with ethics and compliance because, I mean, in my view, compliance is quality. It's just another sort of form of like business quality, right? Like we don't have people we're not opening ourselves up to risk unwittingly or unknowingly. We have less people kind of stepping out of bounds, right? And that's the same thing on a manufacturing floor or whatever. So if you agree with what I'm saying, like how has that commitment that your CEO has to safety been a tailwind for you to put into place the things that you envision for your program?
Yeah. So I'll just take it specific to safety is that we've got a team of lawyers that specifically engage in vehicle safety and recall. And so when they're in all vehicles, I don't care, if it's GM or Ford and has been around since the 1915s, or a new entity like us, all cars are incredibly complex, and so there are going to be recalls, there are going to be fixes, there's going to be these little tiny things that are really important to change, and so by placing emphasis on that places emphasis on our team being able to make those requisite changes and going back to our customers when we need to, like all vehicle manufacturers do, and make adjustments. And how we do that and how assertive we are in doing the right thing really matters, not just reputationally, but regulatorily as well. But if you sit on that and things get bad, and it can impact you in a lot of different ways. So as you were kind of describing the different entities, it all kind of comes down to doing the right thing. And we all know what doing the right thing means, although that definition can be different in different organizations. And it's just ensuring that that is instilled in the culture throughout the organization is really, really key.
So you're a very, I would say a very dynamic person. You're very likable. Like, you probably make friends very, very quickly. And that's somebody who has, I think, a high level of self-awareness, can kind of see what's around them, see the lay of the land quickly. You did a lot of great work at Starbucks, and now you're at Lucid, which is a totally different sort of, part of the, economy, a totally different industry, different sort of stage in its life cycle. How have you adapted your own sort of like tactics in terms of like pushing impact in the organization from the last job to this job? Obviously, there's a different industry, as we just said. It's a startup. There's an engineering company, right? There's this commitment to this like, intangible thing, quality or safety or whatever you want to call it. Have you noticed anything in retrospect over the last year or two that you're like, wow, I've really developed this skill, or I've really kind of seen an opening in the line that I can run through that, existed here that didn't exist over there?
When you ask to the first part of your question, when you ask about orientation, I really do believe that an effective ethics compliance program always starts with the company values. And the reason being is that everyone can understand the values. Generally speaking, if the values are well articulated, everybody gets them intuitively. And so you start with that. If you start from rules and you go through a whole bunch of anti-corruption, items, you start to lose people. But if you can start with those values, those are really key. So that is something that is consistent across the board. I am a big believer that unless there is some sort of material risk that has to be done now and you flood the zone, it's all about incremental improvements. Incremental programmatic improvements lead to incremental reduction of risk. And so that's really key. And when you say, when you ask, has there been differences from these larger companies to something that is new and dynamic? It's just you have to pivot faster. And there's just a lot of moving parts that are going. Things are not as established as we talked about earlier. And so in being able to pivot to those risks in a way that as the business is moving is really, really key to success.
Well, it's really exciting, and I could probably nerd out on just asking more little nuanced questions about the space that you're in right now. Because it's got to be so much change. It's got to be moving so fast. And, I will say it's interesting that your answer there is kind of similar to your health answer, where it's just, you gotta move every day. You got to do a little something every single day. And over time, that stuff starts to really stack up, and you can look back and say, oh my gosh, look at that, 1,300 miles this year. That's crazy.
That's right. Yeah. And nobody can run a marathon on the first day, but give somebody a year or 18 months. And as long as they're physically able, if they just chip at it, all of a sudden they can run a marathon.
Well, it's so funny. Like, so much of our lives and our success and our outcomes are so driven by like our mindset, and you can look at that 1,300 miles and be like, that's a freaking trip to California or something. I don't know. Like, that's a long trip, but then if you just break it down into these little steps and you have the mindset to say, I'm going to put a penny in the jar every day, and that thing is just going to get filled up over time. And I'm not going to worry about how many are in the jar. I'm just going to worry about putting this one in today. It really is a very freeing thing, because you just have to do that one thing today. You just have to go for your run this morning, and then everything else is going to kind of take care of itself. But it's so easy to get over.
But similar to the runs, there are times where you're going to sprain an ankle, or you trip on a log as you're running. And you can't run for a week and a half because you got bruised knees or whatever. And so, but that recognition and that's similar to the space here in compliance, is that you're working on things and you're chipping away at things and you're working on ways to empower the business to be more successful. And then something happens where you have to go into remediation mode. You have to go into investigation mode. And those things happen. And that's part of what we do. So it's the proactive and the reactive. But as long as you are continuously focused on getting back to that proactive, incremental improvement, you're gonna help the business be more successful.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is getting over that hump. Like when you first start running, for example, it's like a pain, but then you hit this sort of inflection point where you're like, you said it yourself, this is who I am, this is what I do. And I think when you hit that tipping point and you trip on the log or you sprain your ankle, there's a different sort of desire and push to get back on track, to get back out.
That's right.
And so it helps you, I think, keep, I'm, kind of going back to my mindset comment. If we have the mindset of incremental improvements, then when we get off track, when something pops or there's a fire or whatever, then it's very easy to get back into it. I think when we're not in that mindset and something like that pops, it's very easy to feel like, man, I'm stuck in the hole. I'm never going to get out of this hole. I'm never going to kind of get back to that thing.
Or you drop the activities that you were working on.
Correct.
And that increases the risk in the organization. Whether it's you drop the cultural aspects of it or the programmatic aspects. And we talked about this, I think, once before, is that I thoroughly believe that no material violations happen on day one. It's right. Day 90, it's day 160. It's the things that build over time where it right. becomes commonplace and okay. And that's what we worry about. If we can address things when they're small and incremental, then great. Then you're right. mitigating the risk for the organization. You never want an independent monitor. You want to be able to build enough of a program where, yes, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. No matter what company you're in, things happen. But to be able to address them when they're small is what's going to keep you from some sort of material, reputational, or regulatory violation. And that's the key.
That is the key, yeah. So let's jump back to the Abu Ghraib stuff. So
sure.
Maybe let's set the stage. So for folks who didn't hear the last episode with you on it, you were a JAG officer in the Iraq War, in the Marine Corps. And maybe let's start there, because I think the story is really cool. And so talk to us about that. You did a couple of other things as a JAG officer. So let's just start the story there.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to serve for 23 years in the United States Marine Corps, 10 years on active duty and 13 years in the reserves. I was a judge advocate the entire time. And did a lot of the classic activities that a JAG does in the military. So prosecutor, defense counsel, those sorts of things. When the Iraq War kicked off, I started with the Marine Division doing some legal work for the division. And then the Marine Corps retrograded. So there was kind of a schedule of units that were coming in, and I asked to stay. So I reoriented myself to the center headquarters, which was known as CJTF-7, which is Joint Task Force 7, which was the 3-star that was the commander of all of Iraq. And so I came up to the headquarters, and they had a need for a magistrate to do reviews of all of the internees, which is commonly known as insurgents. And so what happens, just a little bit of background, under Geneva Convention, there's a whole law, there's the law of war, which we all know about, what is legal in war. Well, there's also a section of the Geneva Convention that when the war is over, there's also laws about what to do in sustainable circumstances, or when you have an occupying force. And so when Bush declared that we won, there was this famous moment where he was on the aircraft carrier and said we won. That actually shifted the legal obligations from a wartime scenario to a sustainment or an occupational scenario. And when that happens, the occupying force can in turn, not prison, but in turn, folks that are still fighting the fight. And they can do that as long as it's in accordance with the Geneva Convention and there is an actual magistrate review that's done in each individual case. And that magistrate or judge has the authority to review and determine if that person is kept. Now, they don't get a criminal conviction, but they're housed in a place where they're to be kept safe and fed and treated humanely. And then every 6 months, they're reviewed as it's time to go. And then that's for 2 reasons. Number one, it's for the safety and security of the occupying force, and also 2, for the peaceful transition of power. And so when those two things happened, those folks would be let go. And so I was the first Geneva Convention magistrate in Iraq during the Iraq War. So there was a need for that when we first were in this sustainment operations. There were not the kind of insurgency activities, but then that built over time. And so we started to detain folks. So they needed someone full time. So I was in Abu Ghraib, which now has a much different nomenclature, and people know it much more than they did in 2003. And so I was the first magistrate that was there. And so
let me just make sure I understand.
Sure.
We were in sort of a war phase governed by Geneva Convention, war laws or whatever.
Yep.
And then Bush goes on there. Law of war. Okay. And then Bush goes on the aircraft carrier and he says, we won. And so then that flipped it into this other phase, this internment phase, or is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. The sustainment phase. Absolutely.
Yeah. The sustainment phase. So like him saying that is what tripped it. Him saying it or like there's a like it has to be it has to have basis, I would imagine, right?
It has to have basis, but when that was stated, the United States made a conscious effort to shift its operations, and so different areas of the convention came into effect. And
so
one of
enough
those
of a basis to justify the sort of switchover or something.
That's right. So take during the war, you would have POWs, you'd have prisoners of war who are let go and that are soldiers, and that's an honorable position that if they're captured, they are to be let go after the war is over. Then you have this different phase of individuals that keep fighting once the war is over. And what Abu Ghraib was intended to do was to house those individuals, not the soldiers that were fighting under the flag, right, but the internees or the insurgents that were continuing to do the fight once the fight was over. So it was a different set of laws and standards.
I see. And so your job was to review each of the what did you call them? Whatever the document that's kind of articulates why they're in there or whatever.
It's Article 78 of Geneva, and so each internee would come in and they would have a full case file, and I would review it and make that determination.
So what was that like? So you were there when he was on the aircraft carrier, so you saw that changeover.
I don't remember specifically because I wasn't originally in that position, but I was later. So I might have been in theater. I can't quite remember.
Okay. Either way. So now you have this new job where you're reviewing these cases.
Yep. I'm in Abu Ghraib, and Abu Ghraib looks a lot like Sing Sing prison in New York. I mean, it is a classic 1940s, tall walls and, just whatever you would see right out of the movies. It's exactly what it looks like.
So then you would just be sitting at a desk reviewing all these cases. And so what kind of stuff were you looking for in that?
So looking for real indications that individuals were either working in groups or individually to harm service members or disrupt just the government or activities to peaceful activities. So these were not common law criminals. This wasn't somebody that robbed robbed somebody's house of food or something. These were individuals that intentionally attacked either the interim government or United States forces.
Got you. Okay. So sorry to interrupt you. So you're doing this position. Abu Ghraib gets opened up. You're reviewing these people. You kind of talked a little bit about what you were looking for. So tell me a little bit about how this sort of story progresses from there.
Okay, so we did not anticipate that we would have the insurgency that we did. And so, we realized there'd be ones or twos and there would be some of that, but it turned into something much larger than we ever anticipated. And so they had to rush both MPs, military police in to be able to house this number of folks, and also military intelligence to try to gain any intelligence that they could.
Wow.
And so what they did is they didn't use active duty Army. What they did is they used National Guardsmen. And so they used National Guardsmen, military police. In fact, the unit was from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio was the unit and they shipped them out there specifically to do this kind of work. And so they were brought in very quickly, integrated, and then just the number of folks came in, a lot came in. So it was a lot that was ramping up very quickly.
Did the false positive rate, or was the false positive rate affected by the fact that National Guardsmen were used versus regular military intelligence people?
No, because the National Guardsmen were those that were guarding the facility.
So it was military intelligence guys.
No, it was each area. You could kind of think of Iraq was divided into not states but different regions, and there were large divisions that commanded each of those divisions, and so those divisions would then bring in folks that were engaged in insurgent activities.
So how quickly did you realize that this was going to be way bigger than you maybe expected, or than you know what I mean?
It was kind of a matter, not to downplay it, but it's almost like a restaurant where you're successful. Your first couple of days, you may get one or two customers, and then all of a sudden you get a flood of customers and you're overwhelmed.
Right.
And that's what it felt like. So, and it was very much commensurate with insurgent activities in theater. And so there was just a very strong ramp up, and they brought in a lot of people to support it.
Why do you think it was so surprising? Like, was it just like like we didn't understand the population as well, like how much insurgent heart they had? Like
there's been a lot of research in that space, and that's not where where I have a lot of background on, but I think we underestimated. We had this belief that when Saddam was removed, that it was going to be, open arms. Everybody was going to be brought in, and that happened for a very short amount of time, and then it shifted. So we did not anticipate the cultural shift that happened.
Wow. So how long were you in that position, and when did it
little less than a year?
Little less than a year. And how long is the whole Abu Ghraib story?
So it started in about 2003, and I do not know when it was fully shut down. But again, it was transferred back to the Iraqi government. Abu Ghraib was originally a civil, your traditional kind of prison, and so there was a handoff at one time, and the insurgents were then released because again there was no reason to keep them under Geneva anymore. So because they were not criminally convicted, they did not have sentences. They were held and reviewed at a certain period of time. Yeah. So Abu Ghraib was around for several years, but when it closed, I'm not exactly sure.
And so there was obviously a big story about it. It has this different connotation. What do you think happened there?
So this is, and we've talked about this before, Nick. This is how I got really passionate about what I do now in the civilian world, and I am so passionate about empowering success through ethics and risk mitigation. Because I thoroughly believe, as I've said earlier on this podcast and the last one, is that material violations, whether they're reputational or regulatory or what have you, do not happen on day one. Yeah. And that they happen over time and they get greater and greater. And so the pictures that we all saw at Abu Ghraib, those things that shamed the United States, that it was the greatest, it was the biggest, red mark to the military since the Vietnam War. Right. It was really that big of a scandal, and that did not happen on day one. It started with a derogatory term and a push, and it built and it built and it built, and all of this misconduct happened between 02 and 04. So it happened in the middle of the night. And it also happened in most of the internees were all outdoors. So they were in still within the confines of the facility, but they were in what you see on TV, the triple concertina wire with the tents and all that kind of stuff. That's where most of them were. There was one hall that you see all the pictures on, where our high visibility detainees were contained, because it was the one structure that wasn't damaged at all from activities in theater. So, 99% were outside, a small percentage were indoors. And there was a team of 6 that were the night guards at Abu Ghraib. And again, like I said, it happened small. And they got so used to their misconduct that it grew and it grew and it grew. And I thoroughly believe, and again, going back to, these were National Guardsmen from Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. These were Americans, like Americans, and all intending to do good things for America and help with a peaceful transition of power in Iraq. All of this stuff. These were not people that came, to Iraq thinking, I'm gonna, beat some people up. Like, nobody had that intent. But this was, in my opinion, and what I experienced, the Stanford prison experiment in real life. And there's been some question as to the validity of the Stanford prison experiment. But the Stanford prison experiment was a prison experiment that was done in the basement of the sociology department of Stanford, and they had to shut it down 4 days earlier because they were worried about the safety of the prisoners, even though the security guards were all students. And it shows what happens when there is not when there's a big power differential and there's not the appropriate controls in place. And like I said, as time has gone on, there's been some light as to how that was potentially influenced in the Stanford prison experiment. But this is the closest thing in real life where it has actually happened. And there were several things that happened. But I truly, truly believe that Abu Ghraib was a result of a failure of ethical leadership. And here are the reasons why. Is that, again, all the misconduct happened in the middle of the night, and there was no ethical leadership by example. The officers, the MP officers, never showed up at night. There was no communication of expectations. There was never this constant discussing of values, what we're doing,
why we're here,
we're beyond reproach. We represent the United States. There was not that kind of continuous discussion of, hey, you are wearing a uniform. This is who you are. We are all going to serve honorably. Third, interestingly enough, is there was no training. These MPs, there's 2 different types of military police. The greater percentage, 90% of them, 85% of them, are your traditional police officers, the folks that patrol the bases and give tickets for speeding and that kind of stuff. There's only a small percentage that actually do prison work. And so these were your classic MPs and were not trained in these ways. So they didn't have a lot of training. The other thing is they didn't have an understanding of their mission. They didn't understand how critical it was for our relevancy to be in theater and to wear the white hat, so to speak, and to really help with the transition of power. They were critical to that, to make sure that these operations were kind of benign and never hit the press and everybody was treated ethically and humanely. That was huge to our ability to effectively transfer power in country. And after Abu Ghraib, the insurgency increased dramatically. And it just shows how 5 people can have a material negative impact. And there's several statistics. You can Google it, but you can see the rates of insurgent attacks post Abu Ghraib as opposed to pre Abu Ghraib. The next one is that the soldiers were overwhelmed. Iraq is kind of like Miami in the fact that it's hot and it's sticky. So imagine being in a cinder block prison for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for a year at a time. And they were just tired and overwhelmed and they didn't want to be there anymore. And every time they looked at an insurgent, they were the reason why they were there. And so there was animosity.
And there was no counterbalance to that in terms of purpose or whatever, value.
That's right.
Impact,
that's right.
Whatever. Yeah.
And then the last two I think are really, really key, is that it started small and it wasn't immediately addressed. And this is what I mentioned earlier, is that it started with a derogatory term in English, and then they started learning a little Arabic and they would throw that stuff out. And then it was a push and a shove, and all of a sudden they were taking shirts off, and then it grew and grew and grew. And they got so comfortable with their misconduct
Right.
that they took pictures of it. And back then we didn't have, we didn't have our phones where we could just send it to people. Some folks had digital cameras and laptops. That was the fanciest of the equipment that people had in 2003. And so, but they got so comfortable that they started burning CDs of these photos. And so that just shows how out of control it became. And a lot of times in corporate America and anywhere in government, what have you, individuals that are engaged in misconduct will all of a sudden turn around and go, oh my gosh, how did I get from point A to point B? How did I do this? And again, these were good Americans that didn't have an evil intent when they started. So it started small and it wasn't immediately addressed. And then the last one is that there just was no supervision. And so to ensure that you've got someone that is that management that is adhering to values, ensuring the standards, communicating expectations, and really proliferating that mission is so, so critical. And those things led, again, to the biggest mark on the military since the Vietnam War. And it was really tragic. And the fallout from that was just heartbreaking.
Well, I mean, it's mind-boggling. I mean, you just said it, but, I mean, how many people are in the military? Several hundred thousand?
There's about 1.4 million.
Okay, 1.4 million.
Including reservists, the last time I checked.
Call it over a million people in the military.
Yep.
Right? And then it just takes 5 of them to be this mar on the reputation, not just on the global stage, where, of course, it matters, not just back home, where, of course, it matters, but in theater, as you said, it had a disproportionate impact, and it made it so much harder to get out of there and do that peaceful transfer of power. I mean, it's such a compliance fail. I mean, there's so many lessons. There's so many that, like, it's such a picture. It's such a corollary to what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. That little incrementalism and not addressing something and not having a vision and purpose and controls in place and supervision. A little thing can turn into somebody throws a cigarette out and it turns into a freaking forest fire, or, it burns down half of California. I mean, it's just like these little things. And, something else I was kind of struck with, we've been talking about, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the one thing when I do these presentations at universities, one of the things that I show is I try to make an analogy to university students versus the military. And what I show is that the demographics of the U.S. military is very close to the general demographics of university students. Like, it's very similar. So you can't just say, oh, it was the military. Oh, it was just those guys. No, we are all subject to the same kinds of mental fallouts and the same kinds of social cues and social forces that can have us do incredibly great things or incredibly evil things.
Yeah. I mean, you see somebody sometimes, you got to just say, like, but for the grace of God, there go I. Because, like, everyone is just like a baby at some point. Tabula rasa, you come in and, someone who's passed out under a bridge with a needle in their arm, at some point they were a baby, and they, at some point they smoked their first cigarette, and then it's this incrementalism thing. And, we've been talking about incrementalism a lot in this conversation, just doing a little thing every single day and pushing that forward. That can go either way. That can go up or down,
That's right. That's right. And you can look back and think, wow, I really made it a long way, or wow, how did I get to where I am? And Abu Ghraib was the latter for sure.
Right. And I mean, if you told those people who were flying from Ohio over there that 6 months from now you're going to be taking pictures of these guys and burning CDs, they'd be like, I would never do that. To your exact point. But it also speaks to how a broader culture, a broader reputation, or a broader brand can be affected by a microcosm or a little microculture that exists within that thing. You know what I'm saying? Yep. I mean, maybe Wells Fargo is a bad idea, but or a bad example of this, because that was so kind of pervasive and coming down from on high. But I mean, there's so many brands that have died because of one little mistake that one little person made, that because there wasn't that control in place or there wasn't that oversight.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And all organizations have those failures. Why? Because it's part of the human experience.
Right.
And so, but the key is to have an organization that's oriented to do the right thing, that's resourced to do the right thing, and then rush to the issue when it's small. And if you can do that, you can enable success. And that, again, that's what I'm really passionate about.
So if you think about the Abu Ghraib thing and use that again as like kind of a metaphor or a picture of an organization, there was obviously a miss there, but I don't feel like the military in general is like asleep at the switch. There was some false sense of security that I think, hey, we've talked about these values in boot camp, and these are the things that are kind of imprinted on us. I think in our last discussion, you kind of described it as like a severe culture, where it's like there's no question about what the values of the Marine Corps is, right? Like everyone knows what those things are. Do you feel like leadership in general? I mean, look, some controls were in place, at large, at kind of a macro level. Those controls didn't work. There was a reliance on those controls, whatever they might be, informal or formal, whatever. How does, like, going back through it, or if we could go back in time, how does leadership in the military for this, in this example, how does leadership avoid that kind of a blind spot? Because again, well-intending people, smart people in the military, we've done this before. We have, protocols and policies and all this kind of stuff. Yet there was clearly, in retrospect, a blind spot. How do we avoid that blind spot? You listed off 7 different things, I think, that like contributed to this thing happening. There are blind spot potentials in each one of those buckets. And it's usually, I think we talked about this before as well. Like most people are not like ill-intending. Most people are not trying to like bring down the brand of their company. It's a blind spot, or they're, they don't see what the true kind of potential impact of their kind of misconduct or non-compliance is. So how do you guard against those, or like, how do you uncover those potential blind spots that might be kind of gaps in your control apparatus?
I think it's complacency. It is complacency. And that does not mean that you believe that your employees are doing ill. No, that's not what I mean. It is to constantly, it goes back to that, building to run a marathon. It's that constant communication, engagement, incremental improvement, always looking for those risks, always looking for those things. And when it comes to leadership, it's the same way. Hey, I've got 5 direct reports. What do I convey to them? What is my tone? Tone at the top is so powerful. What leadership says at all levels matters. So thinking that you're good is the first place that's going to get you in trouble. And again, not because anybody's, naturally evil. And I don't believe that for a second. It's just because we can all go off the wrong path.
Yeah, man. I love it. I don't know. I mean, it's like you're never healthy, right? You're just trying to be healthy. You're never perfect. You're striving for perfection. And I think when you let that sort of status quo, that sort of good enough mentality kind of soak in, then you probably get a lot more blind spot, potential. Man, this was great. I can't believe our hour is already up, man. Thank you so much for coming back on. Great to see you again.
Great to see you, Nick.
Thanks for sharing this story. Where can people find you, or where can they see this presentation? And it'd be great to have you on the Ethics Verse sometime to kind of talk about this, because I just really love those 7 takeaways are really strong.
Yeah, please. I'm happy to, I'm on LinkedIn. So, there's not a lot of Tyson Averys out there. So I'm easy to find. So please link in with me, and I'm happy to converse through that. I've done several university level discussions. So if there's anyone out there that would like a presentation on this, I'm happy to do that. I want to make it very clear. I am a retired Marine now, so I'm not representing the military. These are my own inputs and how I have then incorporated them into what I do now. So these are my own experiences and impressions, but I do think they leave a good impression. But I will say this, I've been doing presentations like this for, 15 years, 20, my goodness, almost 20 years. And it's interesting, the younger groups don't necessarily remember Abu Ghraib the way we do.
Right.
So it doesn't have quite the impact it does. But I'm always happy to convey the message, at least the underlining messages, that really unfortunate circumstance, what it represents.
Well, this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on again. This is really, really cool. We will see you soon. Happy New Year.
All right. Thank you so much, my friend. Take care.